cave-dwelling supernatural creature of Scandinavian folklore who devours flesh. Internet troll.
Well, it's pretty much the same thing, only it's on the internet and there's no Scandinavia.
Deep beneath the earth.
Troll is what I am and what I do.
Beneath your very feet.
IT stands for Internet Troll.
Below your mother's basement.
Welcome, the IT guy. Well, I got lots of good stuff. You know, it's not for me, it's to resell later when people don't have it. Yeah. Oh, I don't need any of this crap. I don't even use toilet paper. Jeez.
Trolling. Keep them trolls a-trolling, rockin' and a-rollin' worldwide. Don't try to understand them, we're way too slick and random. Terrors of the World Wide Web worldwide. What do you want?
And well then, my life is miserable.
I am very happy to hear that.
Trolling ain't just my day job. It's a lifestyle.
What a bunch of losers. Trolling for morons. Just think of it. You're almost halfway there. Many of you are already morons. I'm sorry, did you say you want to take an accounting class?
I mean, I have to for my degree.
Oh, yeah.
I have to.
What's your degree?
Accounting.
There you go. That is your first mistake.
Hey, I ain't saying I got all the answers. I'm saying you got too many stupid questions.
On Facebook and on Twitter, I'm the alpha critter. Make no mistake, you'll end up mortified.
Coming soon to a webcast near you, me, Weldon the IT guy.
What would you say is the creepiest thing that you would say to someone who's passing by on the street?
The creepiest thing?
Yeah.
You're breaking up a little bit, but keep trying. I like it when I can't hear what you say. I got a very important question for you. Come close. Okay. Is she single? Because I'm single.
Misery is the new happy.
Yeah, it's just trolling, that's all. It's what we do. Me and the President of the United States. Thank you all for your kindness in being here on day 3 of the Creative Conference. I'm Steve Whitmire, the artist formerly known as Steve Whitmire. And briefly, these days, I'm doing really stupid stuff like that, what you just saw, developing some other ideas with a couple of colleagues who are also longtime friends. And we're doing this live stream call-in show called Cave-In with the character you just saw, Weldon the IT guy. And the point of the show is to take calls from people. And Weldon is this curmudgeonly little troll who wants to hear about your most miserable experience. And we sort of deal with that in a tongue-in-cheek sort of way. I think it's my therapy and probably maybe for people who have some misery to get off their chest. But anyway, I started doing that mostly as kind of a, you know, attorneys and accountants do these CE courses, they call them. It's continued education. And no matter how long you've been in one of those professions, you learn about the new stuff and you get accustomed to what's the latest thing in your field. And Cave-In is kind of that for me as much as anything. It's a passion project because we literally have zero budget. But it's also a great learning experience. I'm learning how to do a lot of the things that other people formerly would have done on a set and in the editing process and stuff like that. Prior to that, I spent about 40 years as a part of Jim Henson's core group of Muppet performers. Saying that, of course, makes the presumption that you all know the Muppets and that you know who Jim Henson was. I think we're all probably an age group that we do. But in case you don't, as a college student back in the late 1950s, Jim Henson essentially redefined the standard of what is this very ancient art form, all because he was just looking for a way to work in this relatively new medium at the time called television. And of course, the art form was puppetry. And it's kind of ironic, since Jim never had any aspirations whatsoever to be a puppeteer. It just happened to be one of the many things that he did that stuck with people and resonated the most. But Jim was a real mentor to me, really from the time I was 10 years old. And it was a while later that I met up with him. And by that time, when I joined him and his original team in their work, I think Jim was at an age that he was beginning to think about sort of passing on his methodologies, his way of doing the work that he had done onto a next generation of people who shared his vision. And me being this very naive, eager 19-year-old sponge at the time, I was kind of an ideal apprentice to soak up his mastery. Whether it's a TED Talk or here at the Creativity Conference, when you do a talk like this, it's important for somebody like me to quote someone in the hopes that their profundity will help to mask the fact that I have no clue what I'm talking about. So I just want to quote Jim, if I may. He said, and I'm going to read this. He said, "I don't know exactly where ideas come from, but when I'm working well, ideas just appear. I've heard other people say similar things, so it's one of the ways I know that there's help and guidance out there. It's just a matter of figuring out how to receive the ideas that are waiting to be heard." And that was so true of Jim's work, and it was something that I certainly learned from him. When we were shooting the Muppet Show, back when the dinosaurs were still roaming the earth, he once told me that the end product of all that stuff we did on the Muppet Show that we were shooting was only about 60% of what he saw in his mind. And I remember thinking at my young age how incredibly frustrating that must be to have this vision and not to realize maybe 40% of it. But what I soon came to realize was that that was because Jim was a very gracious collaborator who would consider input and ideas from anyone and everyone. And by the time he quite willingly allowed the rest of us to contribute what we wanted to contribute, he had forfeited nearly half of what he originally wanted to do. And that was, of course, what made being with Jim more about working with him than working for him. Now, I'm okay to talk about my own journey and process to whatever extent you guys are interested, but I think what we're all here for might be more than just my personal progression within what it is I do. So my hope for the short time that we have here is that it be less about the Steve Whitmire story and more a bit of a dialogue between us when we get to that, about things like where our ideas might come from and why we have the ideas we have. Because frankly, I have no idea the answer to those two questions, despite what the title of my talk said. And if I do all the talking, I don't get to learn anything. So I hope all of you won't be shy about it and will contribute to a discussion here amongst very like-minded people. There are no wrong things to say here. And that's because whether you're an artist or an accountant, you are a creative being, an artist of sorts. And I'm convinced that your particular subjective interpretation of the world around you is largely the result of your creation. That's not to entirely agree with that notion that we create our own reality, but to some degree we do. And I think we do that through our own unique interpretation of the world and of life based on all the things we pick up throughout the whole process, and we carry them with us throughout our time here. But at the same time, I could jump off the Eiffel Tower and flap my arms really hard, and chances are I won't create a safe landing. So I still think we create a lot of what we perceive. But I do know that my work with Jim and beyond has relied on at least a couple of really broad general things. And those two things are perspectives and consciousness. There's an amazing, profound thinker and author, this guy named Ken Wilber, who is fortunately also a buddy of mine. And he once said to me that if you want to get a universe going, you have to have perspectives. And if you happen to be an actor, whether you do it with your face or whether you do it with a puppet, perspectives are kind of at the top of the list of important factors. And I think that's probably true with most artistic ventures. And it's true in our society. It's true in day-to-day life. And it explains a lot of what we see in the world right now, differing perspectives. And I think it's because so much of our reality is based on things being defined by their opposites, good and bad, light and dark, happy, sad, hero, villain, stuff like that. But your art, your particular interior subjective first-person expression of your perspective gives whatever you create in your mind a kind of a unique slant. Whether you're an artist, whether you're an actor, whether you're a waiter, and in LA, those are the same thing a lot of times, actor and waiter. Anyhow, now whether or not someone's particular art is marketable is a different thing altogether. Even if it's unique and even if it's incredibly good, it might not turn out to be marketable. And for that reason, I often say to young people who ask me how they can get a job with the Muppets, how they can get a break into show business. I think it's important to make a distinction between whether you want to be a puppeteer or whether you want to work with the Muppets, because they're kind of two different things in a way. The pursuit of one's own creativity is, I think, more about self-worth and self-growth than about a fantasy of fame and fortune. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be famous. I think that's fine too. But I just think it's good to be clear that that's part of your motivation so it doesn't impede on your artistic expression. At the same time, I think it's entirely possible to have, a day job and still be a thriving artist. And you can measure your success by your own achievements. And it's great to be able to do that. But at the end of the day, it's your perspective alongside my perspective, alongside all of your perspectives, that I think filters an awful lot of what it is we create. Now, in my work, we take all these really sometimes quite abstract, inanimate objects. They're made of fabric and fleece and foam and glue and fur. And to the extent that our own individual skills will allow on a really good day, we try to transform those objective these puppets, into a subjective I. The idea is that for that puppet to become and to be perceived as a kind of an organic, biological, living, breathing entity that kind of has a soul of its own. That's kind of the goal of the art form, just as maybe a painter projects what's in their mind onto a canvas. And broadly, it's not unlike what any actor does in preparation to play a character in any role. Except that I don't think actors, I don't know, maybe if they're playing a zombie, I'm not sure they have to think about how to make themselves seem like they're alive. I think most actors just kind of fall into that. But I know that over my lifetime, while I've been trying to do that myself, with these characters, my work has always been very collaborative in the studio with the people around me, some wonderful people. But it occurred to me early on that we were also working in this sort of creative partnership with our audience as they kind of suspend their disbelief that puppets aren't real and kind of join me in the fun of making them real, giving them life. So at least for the work that I do, I tend to think that it's a good idea for an artist to work towards conveying at least certain essentials of what they intend to get across, even if some of the interpretation is left more open to the viewer of the art. And I think the key to you choosing to participate in our creative partnership, if you're watching any work that I do, is consciousness. This convincing illusion that an inanimate puppet that we all know is just being manipulated by a person underneath has conscious thought in their mind, and that character's consciousness jives with your own, what you know to be true. So for me, the importance of creating characters that you as an audience will trust to the extent that you forget it's a puppet brought up a question for me of what constitutes consciousness to us. Right now, how do you know I'm a real alive person? These days I could be a pretty convincing hologram that might even seem more alive than I do. But let's just say we were able to be all in the same room, and I hope someday we will. What are the sort of the minimum cues to consciousness that let us know the person next to you is a living thing, you know? How do you know that? And it's actually quite small. You know, it's a change in a little couple of muscles in the face and a turn of the head. And, you know, I think puppetry has that question in common with any discipline that seeks to create believable characters. But more broadly, anytime we engage in the conveyance of truth, true life, true emotion, because truth tends to build trust. But I know with our work, you know, the less we move the puppet and still are able to, I'm doing this because that's what we do, the more life it gives it. You know, if I'm talking to you, I'm not moving a lot. I'm not incredibly animated. And if I'm listening, I'm really mostly stationary. I might nod yes or blink. But the economy of the movement is so important. And I think that transfers to CGI characters and stuff like that. And, you know, an interesting thing, when Jim was at the helm of the stuff we were doing, a part of everything we produced was playing back the video of what we had just shot. You know, we'd shoot a scene, we would immediately look back at it to check things. And he used to call it, he used to say we were doing that for educational purposes. He'd say, let's play that back for educational purposes. And that's exactly what it was. It was a way of immediately kind of stepping out of our own subjective view of our own contribution to a scene. Very easy to focus just on your thing, you know, especially when it's puppets, and take an objective, big picture view of the whole. So that on the next take, everyone could kind of dial in whatever they screwed up the first time. And, you know, and when you first start doing that, you know, you look at your puppet, you look at your thing, and you kind of, doesn't matter whether anybody else did a good job. If I got it right, okay, let's keep that one. Let's not do it again. But one day I was sitting on a set next to Jim as we were doing one of these video playbacks of a scene we had just shot, and he was squinting his eyes. He was like doing this as he looked at it. And he asked me to do the same thing. And I'm sitting there squinting, you know, we're both squinting, and I'm thinking, this is really stupid. But he explained that it was his way of obscuring quite a lot of the detail, really in order to get a broader view, a different perspective, looking at the bigger picture while simultaneously narrowing the focus of the detail that might appear to be the whole picture, but can sometimes prevent us from seeing everything. And in that case, it was about composition, you know, about the way diverse shapes and colors within a frame, within an image, shared the space and made up an overall image. And so Jim was constantly composing a frame, like one little shot out of a whole musical number, out of a whole show, or out of a whole film, to be the best composition that he could do. And then he would say, we need a couple more chickens in the foreground, you know, and somebody would hop in with chickens. I think our work may be the only work that there is in the business, unless you're a chicken farmer, where someone would say, we need more chickens. I always found that kind of funny. But I think it's about a certain level of abstraction that really great artists intuitively develop and use, that allows them to convey a vision in what can really be some very abstract ways, but with the right amount of detail versus the right amount of abstraction to convey a statement. Great writers do that, and you know, artists and photographers and poets and songwriters, you know, whether you do that with images or with words or with sounds. One last thing, because I really would rather have a conversation with you guys if we can manage that. And it's something that I expect most of you within a gathering like this are already completely familiar with, but I want to mention it because I find it can be such a big help to opening up possibilities if it becomes habitual. And that's the idea of Shushing, which is having a beginner's mind. Even if you've been perfecting your particular craft for a lifetime, I think approaching whatever it is that you're creating with the openness of a beginner lets you evolve the wheel rather than reinventing it. You know, you can always go your own direction, but really approaching it like you don't have the answers can sometimes net the answers. And of course, ultimately, I can only talk about what it is that I do. And what I do is play with puppets for nearly 50 years. God, that's a long time. But however, broadly, I hope that you guys might be able to connect with some of the same commonalities that we have when you look at what you do. I'm going to attempt, if I can push the right buttons here, to show you something I'm extremely proud of. Now, it may not look like a big deal, but we've been doing this cave-in show for a while. And besides taking phone calls from people, the other thing that I do is we try to do these really ambitious production numbers in the middle, because I've worked in these really upper levels of show business all my life, and I can't let go of the production value. So based on having no budget and me doing all the editing and coming up with the music, and oh my God, we try to do pretty ambitious stuff. We're about to broadcast, I should say premiere, a piece next Friday night on Cave-In. We do this the last Friday of every month, called Star Trek Wars. And it's a parody on all the outer space movies. And so Star Trek sounds a little bit like Star Trek and Star Wars. And I only have one puppet, so Weldon plays all the parts, and it's Weldon talking to Weldon on green screen. It's interesting, fun little exercise to play off yourself and try to make it unique. Anyway, it's only 30 seconds. I'm not going to run a long video. And I hope I can share my screen and just this. If you don't get the audio, don't panic, because it doesn't even matter. I just want to show you this thing because it's a real significant step in what we're doing. So let me see if this will now, let me hit a share button. Yes, look at that. I think it's going to work. And see if I can get the controls right here to play it. So just 30 seconds. I think that's it. Am I back? I'm back. So that is a little bit of a milestone for me. One of the things I am really very interested in is the idea of taking the older technology, these puppets that are, they're kind of like practical effects if you think about it, and blending that with new CGI computer technologies, not to compete with each other, because I think they sometimes do. But I think you can enhance both by combining them together. And so this was just an attempt really to generate some 3D backgrounds, working with a young man named Isaac Gazmararian, who created all of that outer space stuff. Really cool, really cool. It's a great little piece. And we have Weldon playing everybody from, Obi-Wan Kenobi to Yoda in this thing. So I hope you guys will watch it. If you can't show up on Friday nights at 10 o'clock, then watch it on the YouTube channel. But where are we? Let's open this up and spend our remaining time. I hope you guys have got, you don't have to ask questions. You can just throw in comments. Thank you, Alberto. I'm seeing a little bit of chat over there. If only I could score like you. Wouldn't life be better? But yeah, Aiden, is there a way we can, I could read chat questions, but I'd love for you guys to actually speak a little bit.
Yeah, we've had a few questions already answered in the chat, so we'll try and get through those first. We've got as a puppeteer, what do you find is the best way to find your own creative voice? Is there a path to finding your perspective or suggestions you have to developing your acting ability? There's almost no difference really between what any actor does. There's a great puppeteer named Martin Robinson who works on Sesame Street. He has a term he calls regular actors meat actors. I love that because they're well, you get it. So whether you're a meat actor or whether you're a puppet, the acting is the same. You want to have a little backstory. You want to have a character that you may know more about than the audience does, so you can pull on things. And you want them to convey whatever it is they're trying to convey, whatever emotion it is. Now, with puppets, you know what? I wasn't going to do this. I'm going to do it. I've got, this is a terrible puppet. It just happened to be the only one I have. This is our takeoff on Chewbacca the Wookiee. We called him Gooey the Bookie. And I can't do a Chewbacca sound, but let's just say he talked in my voice. He would talk like this. He's got terrible eyes to demonstrate anything, but you make contact with the camera. He looks into the camera. It's important to contact your audience, as best you can. You look right into the screen like that. And, but anyway, and you try to make him as alive as you can, which I'm doing a really terrible job at right now. But anyhow, I'm not concentrating on it. But approach puppetry exactly the same as acting. All you're doing is pushing your performance out through your right hand or your left hand, or if it's marionettes. By the way, let me say quickly, I don't particularly think the Muppets are some superior kind of puppetry. It's what I was drawn to, and I think they work particularly well for television and for a screen. And that was really a great deal of Jim's genius, was adapting them for that purpose. I hope I answered your question. I think I kind of did.
Yeah, that was great. We've also had a question that says, I love the viral video of Kermit the Frog covering It Feels Like Christmas. Was the video also a tribute for Jerry Nelson?
Oh, you know what? I'm not sure I know that video. As you all know, I'm not Kermit anymore, but at least not officially. I sort of carry him with me wherever I go. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I will say that of all the Muppet movies, I love the very first one with Rainbow Connection, and my second favorite is Muppet Christmas Carol, because it was the first film we did after Jim passed away. So it was kind of it let us know that we were going to be able to keep going. And it was my first big role as Kermit. So I either had to step up to the plate or, really embarrass myself in front of Michael Caine. You don't want to do that. So anyhow.
We've had another one that says, how did Jim help and encourage you to get beyond any self-doubt that you may have had?
It's really interesting with Jim. He didn't spend a lot of time telling you that you did a great job. You sort of knew you did a great job if he didn't say, try this a different way. He was the most humble, patient human being I might have ever met. Very soft-spoken, very much a classic kind of Southern gentleman, extremely accepting of people, really tried to be interested in other people's capacity and talent and what they had to say and what they had to contribute, and very thoughtful and quiet, quite quiet. And I think his biggest encouragement was to stick with you. Very briefly, I'll give you a story. The first speaking part I ever had on the Muppet Show, you can probably find this on the internet, so embarrassing, was me playing a guard outside of Liberace, the piano player's, his dressing room door. And this guard was supposed to be this big, tough, mean character. And I'm this 19-year-old kid who had no acting experience. And I just didn't have it in me to be mean. Plus, I had to be mean to Kermit, who Jim was playing, and which meant I had to be mean to Jim, essentially, as far as I was concerned. I couldn't do it. It was terrible at it. When we were working in the UK, the unions were quite strong, and at 7:30 every night, the lights went out. You're in the middle of a take, the engineers were going home. So you had to be done on your shooting day. And it was about 7:10 when we started this scene, and I was just screwing it up, and it was terrible. And poor Richard Holloway, who was our floor manager, was saying, Jim, it's 7:15, we really have to. And Jim's just saying, And it was that kind of patience as you were clearly struggling, that got you through this stuff.
Yeah, that's great. We've had another question. Well, not necessarily a question, but Josh says that, hey, Steve, I don't have a question, but I wanted to tell you that I'm a big fan of your work. I always turn to the Muppets when things got difficult in my life because they always made me laugh. Your work as Kermit and others was a big influence in my life. Thank you for all the work that you did.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. A lot of people say that very sincerely for many different reasons. And I think people of many multiple generations shared in that work, with family and friends and fellow classmates and stuff like that. So I appreciate that.
We've had a question from Zach that says, where do you find the inspiration? Like for something like Weldon, for instance, or in general. Was any part of him inspired by interactions on the Muppet Pundit page by any chance?
Oh, yes, the Muppet Pundit page. For those of you who don't know, it was a big, well, I wouldn't say it was a mistake. It was a mistake on my part to make it. It was a blog that turned into an out of control Wild West forum at the time when I when I'd sort of just been pushed out of the Muppets, and there was this side fighting that side, and I didn't know how to censor people. I didn't censor people. I let everybody say whatever they wanted to say, and boy, it was World War III. Yeah, I mean, so I was trolled, heavily trolled, and I thought it would be, sometimes these creative things come out of a means, looking for a means to an end, because I wanted to do something very small here with a character. And I thought, well, the way to reach people, I can't just go out and automatically dream up a television deal. So let's do something really small that we can manage, that we can do on YouTube or Facebook or something like that. And when I first started doing puppetry, the first job I ever had when I was about 16 years old was doing a local Atlanta television show with a character of my own named Otis. And it was a call-in show, like legitimately, not an internet, of course, because that didn't exist. I would run the puppet with one hand in the air, lying flat on the floor in an 8-foot ceiling, so the camera's above me, right? And I've got the puppet on, and I'm pushing the lines on the telephone over here as we're doing it, and I had no camera operator, it was a stationary camera. But at that time, there were only like 4 channels. There was ABC in the States, there was ABC, CBS, NBC, and PBS, and then there was us. We were like a local number 5 channel. And it was, you had that little round UHF antenna to pick us up. It was insane. And we were getting the phone company, we were blowing up the phone company because we were getting, they tracked more than 2,000 calls an hour. Now, these days you wouldn't get that because people have 1,000 other things to watch, but kids after school would watch, and I was on the air live for 2.5 hours a day, taking phone calls. Insane to be on the air that much. And so I loved it. I thrived on it. And it's my favorite thing to do throughout my Muppet years. My favorite stuff was to be freed from a script and just do an improvised thing with Kermit or one of the other characters on the Today Show or something like that. So I've come full circle. I'm back to doing that with this character. And I wanted to do that. So the inspiration from Weldon was, number 1, to do something simple. Number 2, to do something that cost, no more than I had to spend to set up a space to do it, which was still a lot. And just to jump into doing it, and sort out the technology of live streaming. But I will also say that I had this, I've been carrying this around for years. I had this little sketch I'd done like on a notepad from a hotel room of a creature. And it was a character I didn't know what it was ever going to be, if I'd ever build it or have it built. And it was basically Weldon, little guy with horns and teeth sticking up and, skinny. I love this idea of these skinny, long arms with big oversized hands on the end. It just seemed goofy. And that became Weldon. So that initial sketch is years old. And it took years for him to actually turn into anything. So I think the ideas come from everywhere. My motto is never let a good pun go to waste, which annoys a lot of people. I work with a gentleman named Jim Lewis, who's a longtime Muppet collaborator. And he helps me with the scripts on these things. He sort of puts the icing on the cake. I come up with the concept, and Jim and I go back and forth and bounce back and forth. Anyway, so the inspiration comes from all over the place. A musical style, and then I am a really hack music guy. I go in with my computer and play all the instruments on a keyboard, and I try to come up with songs. Some of them are pretty good. I scored this whole Star Wars thing, and I discovered something really interesting about John Williams. He's brilliant. But if you want to parody John Williams, you can play almost anything and it sounds suspenseful. I don't mean no disrespect to John Williams, because he's amazing. But if you listen closely to all the Star Wars stuff, he's got all these little flourishes. In every bar, he'll do this trumpet flourish. And then it's like, okay, now what can I do? Oh, I'll do a violin thing. I know that's not how he did it, but that's what it feels like to an untrained ear. So I just threw in all this stuff. It'd be interesting to get reactions from the scoring that I did on this thing. Sorry, go ahead, Aiden.
You just mentioned like John Williams, he's one of my favorite composers, but the magic of him is that First of all of those major themes are less than 10 notes.
Yes.
That's it. And that theme is
Yeah.
throughout the entire movie in 1,000 different ways, in the most creative way I've ever seen. It is absolutely, if you listen to those flourishes, it's just those 7 notes. It's the same thing all the time, only you don't notice it. It's so brilliant. You just mentioned one of my favorites. So, and thank you for this talk, by the way. You said amazing things that resonate.
My goodness. Thank you, sir.
And, you say I just do puppets, but, you make it look easy because you're taking this thing that is just, an object and it's got life to it. So you do a lot to that. It's amazing what you do with that. So.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I think that may be what the commonality is between this little thing that I do and what everyone else here will do. You take something that doesn't have life yet and you give it life. It's pretty cool. But yeah, John Williams, my goodness. So you'll listen to this thing, Alberto, and you'll say, "Oh my God, this is a mess." But you'll get the point of what I was trying to do.
And so I have a question for you in that, when you're coming up with these things, I find, and I've been chatting with a lot of other artists and folks here. I see a commonality. There's a lot of things coming. We open ourselves up, right, to have all this thing come through immersion, all these things,
sure.
Everything coming at you. So when you have an overabundance of ideas, how do you filter through like, oh, let's go with that one? Because you can only go through so many iterations before you go down black holes.
Exactly. Well, it's really interesting. It's funny you said black holes because that's what I've been working on editing. Anyhow, it's very different at this stage.
If you ever need to get inside, I do a lot of 4K workflows. So happy to help you with that.
Oh, cool. Fantastic. I'll sign you up. But it's very different now than it would have been with the Muppets because I had a whole crew of people there who did what they did at the top of their game. And I didn't have to think about any of those things. I thought about my performance and my next scene and getting my lines as best I could and so forth and so on, and how I could best portray what I was doing. But with this new world that I'm in, I'm kind of doing the whole thing with a little bit of help, but it's mostly a one-man show. And I find that I'm not only improvising, phone calls with people, I'm improvising every aspect of everything I'm doing, whether it's, I got to score this, I have to, I have to write the script, I have to do the lighting, everything happens so spontaneously and I kind of have to go with it. And honestly, the stakes are low, but it's pure flow. It is pure whatever's going through me. And it's and really that's a function of having a deadline and being the only person trying to do something really ambitious. It may not necessarily be the smartest way to work. It's incredibly, it can be exhilarating and stressful at the same time. And it can be really rewarding when it works. And I don't know whether it works to anybody but me, but one thing I learned early on.
You're right, because we had that discussion with Maxim that you need to have a target where you need to actually deliver it, because if that through that pressure, sort of the creativity doesn't. If you have an endless amount of time, you can endlessly. I mean, I could endlessly keep tweaking. I think everybody here could probably endlessly keep tweaking on something that they do forever. You need to have that, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And a deadline can be the thing that disciplines you into doing that. And one thing I know I learned from Jim in that sort of abstract way of looking at things is there's a place where it's better than good enough. And you just need to stop there. Learning where to judge that line is hard. It's taken years for me to do that, I guess. But you really want to you have to stop tinkering eventually and say, this is what I'm presenting, and you go with it. And sometimes it's terrible in my case. And sometimes it's pretty good. I find that these days, more often than not, it's what I intended. And I'm kind of doing it mostly for myself at this point, I appreciate what other people think, but there's a great documentary. If you guys haven't seen it, I think Martin Scorsese directed a documentary about George Harrison. And within this documentary, he's speaking with I believe it's Terry Jones from Monty Python. And he's talking about that time frame during the 80s And I'm going to get the quote wrong, but the gist of it is, it was a very arrogant time when we didn't care what the audience thought. We just did what we wanted to do and hoped people would watch it, but it really didn't matter. We were just doing what we wanted to do. And that's largely the way Jim worked. He was just doing the next thing he wanted to do. And, it was nice that people resonated with it and liked it. But I try to not get tied up in whether people are thinking too much, you know what I mean? Not to the point where it tailors my direction of what I'm going to do. I try to just follow what feels like the next logical step to me. If that makes any sense.
Sorry to butt in there, Steve. We've got about 5 minutes left of the session, so
okay.
We're just going to try and quick fire get through some of these final questions.
Yeah. You go for it. Go for it.
Before the end of the session. So we've got what have there been any constraints like budget, quarantine people, which have led to unexpected creativity in producing Cave-In?
Well, on this show we've just done, we were trying to do something very complicated. I know nothing about how to work in 3D technology on a computer, and the person I'm working with on the other end of that, Isaac, is quite young and is just kind of getting into the industry. So we're trying to send notes back and forth, and I think I'm being really explicit, and he's taking it a completely different way, which is what happens with that perspective thing I was talking about. So we eventually just did Zoom calls, and that helped. And then we eventually just put on masks and had to get in the same room. But I think we're all affected by that. If you're doing any kind of an artistic form where you're having to collaborate, I think it's much better to be in the room with people. And I sure hope that happens soon.
Yeah, me too. Another question from John is that when working on a character, do you have to find a hook or an in or a link into the headspace, like a quirk or phrase that leads you into the headspace for the character?
It's a funny thing. The one for me is, on my original characters, it was always how the character laughed. And as weird as that sounds, that would clue me into an awful lot about the character. Like I did this character called Wembley Fraggle on a show called Fraggle Rock. And somehow along the way, I realized that Wembley made this kind of a sound. And once it's just a ridiculous sound. It came out of me clearing my throat before a take one day. I've got the puppet on. You're seeing the puppet. You're not seeing me. I'm in Toronto. It's freezing cold. I've got, stuff in my throat. I'm going, and it turned into Wembley's voice. And suddenly Wembley's going, and it turned into his thing that he did. Kermit really never laughs out loud. He barely has an audible laugh. And so that's part of Kermit. He's reserved in that way. So it may seem like an odd thing, but the way they laugh is very important to me. Yeah,
that's really insightful. Thank you for that. We've got one comment that says, "I'd love you to see an attempt of yours to recreate one of Hans Zimmer's scores."
Oh wow! yeah, let's do it. Yeah, he was around when we were doing Labyrinth and stuff like that. He might come after me. I don't know. Anyhow, yeah. Well, I can quote. I don't know whether recreate's the right word. Butcher is probably more like it. But
okay, I think we've got time for one final question.
All right, we'll do one more.
Which is from Cameron here. Did you find that inheriting legacy characters could potentially limit your creativity, in that Kermit or Ernie would have to answer a question in a manner that would be authentic to Jim?
Yes and no. This is a long conversation, but I'll try to give the shortest answer I can since we don't have much time. It was very important to me with both of those characters and any of the other, quote, legacy characters that were anyone else's, for them to evolve. And I think evolution has a very specific definition for me. I'm just regurgitating stuff I've learned from other very smart people. Evolution is transcending and including what went on before. You have a foundation for something, but you stay on that foundation and you transcend that foundation and let it go in new directions, or it just stays stagnant. Kermit could not become a corporate icon. And what I had was a basis in my 12 years or so that I spent working alongside Jim almost all the time, watching him as he performed Kermit. Had I not had that experience, there would have been no hope in Kermit continuing, in my opinion. It had to be based on Jim. And so as soon as I started, as sappy as it sounds in a way, as an acting exercise in a way, what I had to do was start acting Jim, what I knew of Jim, trying to be like him, and then putting that back into Kermit in the way that Jim did, the things that were a part of Jim that became Kermit. So evolution was the key, not just changing him, not just him becoming a new character, is very important. But let me very quickly say, I don't think it limited creativity. I think it opened up a different kind of creativity. It became very important to be creative within the confines of an established character that everyone in the world already knew.